Hi, this is Dr. Stephanie Wautier, and I'm the host of Conversations with a Chiropractor. This is not a health how-to, but rather a conversation with some amazing people I've had the pleasure of being with on my journey of life. Think of it more like Tuesdays with Maury, a fireside chat, or chicken soup for the soul. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy this conversation with a chiropractor. Today, I am joined by Barb Allisimi, a Negaunee native. Barb, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to it all week.
I'm going to share that earlier today, you mentioned that this is your 70th year walking on this earth.
Yes.
And that you love to challenge yourself to do new things. So this is a new thing that
This is a new thing. I've never done it before, so it's a learning experience.
Well, I'm so happy that you agreed
you.
to come on
Thank you,
this
thank you.
podcast. So you were born in Ishpeming.
I was born in Ishpeming, and when I married, we purchased in Negaunee.
Now, who was the first person in your family to come to the United States from Finland?
That was my grandfather, and he came late teenager, early 20s.
Okay.
And he traveled with a relative. He left Finland. His mother had passed away when he was a young man. He was maybe 8, 9 years old. So it was just he and his father.
Okay.
And I thought that must have been a hard decision to leave Finland and come to the United States, and you're leaving your father behind.
Yeah.
His parents, my great-grandparents, were quite a bit older. So I'm sure when he left, he realized I may never see him again. His mother, when my grandfather was born, his mother was 46.
Oh, my goodness.
And that was her first child.
Wow.
And so she died in her early 50s.
Wow.
His father, my great-grandfather, was even a few years older than my great-grandmother.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
And for that time in
That
our
was-
world, that was probably very uncommon. Like,
very,
Like,
very,
right now, you're a geriatric mother if you're like in your 30s giving birth.
yes.
Wow.
So he was an only child, and I'm sure when he left, it was bittersweet because his father was aging, and I'm sure was well aware of the fact he probably wouldn't get back to see him. So that journey was probably full of adventure, but probably hard on the heart as well.
Yeah. Very hard on the heart. So he comes to the Upper Peninsula.
So he came to the Upper Peninsula, and he wanted to continue his education. He ended up in another state and got some education and came back. He was from Finland. However, the community that he grew up in was Swedish. So he spoke Swedish. And when he came to this country, he learned English and kept his Swedish. He participated in some Swedish organizations, and that allowed him to keep his native language and embellish that culture. He went back to school and learned English. After being here and educating and doing some interesting things, he ended up being a postmaster. The first postmaster to go out in the city of Negaunee with a car.
Wow.
He went, I think, once or twice a week, but he realized that so many people on the route were Finnish-speaking people. So he taught himself Finnish so he could communicate.
Oh, my goodness.
And he then would say to his customers, if there's anything you need from town, give me a grocery list. I'll pick it up and I'll come back with your mail and the groceries. So he had 2 jobs.
My gosh.
He taught himself. It was very important. Communication was very important to him.
How generous of spirit was he
Very.
to like address this need, go to the extent where he's going to learn this other complete language and be like, hey, I'm going to help you out. What year would this have been, give or take?
That would have been that he was the postmaster. That would have been like 1923, 24.
Oh, my goodness.
And yes, he went out into the Buffalo location, they call it, and the outlying areas. And I think he went once or twice a week.
Wow. let's for the listeners, because we're going to talk a lot about your grandfather, but let's tell what his name is.
Okay. So my grandfather's name in Finland was Lenhart Joseph Bucka.
Okay.
And when he came to this country, of course, it was shortened. And W's and V's kind of interact or interchangeable. And somehow it ended up with Vilberg.
Oh.
It was shortened to Vilberg. And when in my childhood, my father didn't know his father. My grandfather, Lenhart, drowned in Lake Superior at a very young age. So my dad had very little details about his dad. He was only 4.5.
Wow.
My dad had a younger sister, a 3-year-old, an 8-month-old. And like I say, my dad was 4.5 when Lenhart passed away. So my dad shared very little about his dad. He just didn't know. That was fascinating to me. I remember being like 8 or 9 years old and thinking, my dad didn't have a dad. I did. And I put value to that. It was important that I had my dad in my life. He was such a giving man and would do so much for us kids. And you didn't have that. Curiosity grew in me to the point that I was like, I had to know more about him. My father wasn't a source. Did not meet Lenhart, obviously, or my grandmother. She passed away before I was born.
Okay.
So they were grandparents by name only. We didn't have a personal relationship like I did with my mother's parents. And so that grew in me to learn more. I must have been 13, 14, 15 when I really started to think, okay, how do I do this?
Wow.
How do I find out about this man? I remember being young. My dad was from Negaunee, grew up in Negaunee. And I remember being quite young and everybody saying, looking at me going, oh my gosh, you look just like them. And I remember thinking, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Who are
Right.
they?
You didn't know.
Do I have their
them.
nose? Or
Right.
is it their smile? What is it in me that you see of them?
Yeah.
So then the curiosity got even higher.
Stronger.
So I started to research. I was like a hound dog. I would get one little piece of information and it would open up another door. I was very fortunate. My mother-in-law grew up in Finland, and as an adult, she was probably close to 40 when she came to this country. So she had like two separate lives.
Yeah.
She said to me, well, what if I write? I found out in Finland in the churches hold your family history. If you move, you went to your church, you picked up your packet of information, you went to your new home, and you dropped your packet of information off at the church. So I knew the city that my grandfather was from. And my mother-in-law wrote. And of course, she could write in the native tongue, which was made it helpful. And we got back some information that I don't know how we would have gotten otherwise. That's when my whole genealogy world kind of just blossomed. The man, my grandfather, that I knew as just my grandfather and just a name, all of a sudden started to develop a personality. I had the good fortune of talking with an individual in Negaunee that actually grew up with my grandfather in Finland.
Wow. In Finland?
In Finland, as boys, they played together.
My gosh.
And then my grandfather came first, and he came 6 or 7 years later. So they knew each other. Well, that was a treasure because he was able to draw a picture of where their house was, what it looked like on the inside. He had told me he was an extraordinarily tall man for that.
Like region? Or?
Yes, and for that time span. It seemed like most Swedish people were a lot shorter. But he was tall, and he said all the girls in the neighborhood really liked him And his personality was very big. So all of a sudden, he became alive.
Yes.
And of course, I'm filling my dad in.
Wow.
That was kind of a funny feeling for me because I thought it should be the other way around.
Yes.
He should be telling me about his dad.
Yeah.
And here I am. And I see him, he's sitting on the edge of the seat with interest, you know. So I felt like, for the first time, I felt like, oh my gosh, Lenhart left his children at such a young age. His children were so young. He didn't get to be a voice.
Yes. Yes.
And it dawned on me, he's working through my voice and passing on this information to my dad.
It's almost like he called you, like he called
Very much
to
so.
you.
Very
Like you
much
said,
so.
when you're 8 or 9, you have this thought, this interest, this curiosity. You're 12, 13, 14, you start digging and researching.
Yes,
And so your dad was 4.5 when his father passed.
correct.
And then they had also an 8-month-old, your
Yes.
grandmother,
And a 3-year-old.
and a 3-year-old. So here is this woman who's now completely, without a partner, without a spouse. And in that age and that era, it was probably the biggest devastation. How is she going to raise
Absolutely.
this family? And then what does that look like, right? What does that familial
Right.
survivalist thing look like? Like, it's just interesting to think about.
My grandfather drowned with 2 other men, and it was on a Sunday. It was in October. They were invited, a group of them were invited to a camp. By the way, the camp is still standing in its original condition. They were invited to this camp, and it was a day of family sharing. It was beginning of October. The weather was starting to change. They were going to do a cookout. Through my research, I found he had purchased a little piece of land that was butt up against his camp land. In one of the newspaper articles that I had researched, it said they were celebrating, and I think it was the purchase of that land. And it was just to get together and have a good time.
And this camp is right on Lake Superior.
Right on Lake Superior. So the wives, the husbands, the kids, they all gathered. There was food. They had the sauna lit. And 3 of the men, my grandfather being one, decided they were going to do a little fishing. And of course, the weather predictions aren't like they are now.
Yes.
The weather at the time seemed fine, and they take a boat, they go out. They're not far out, but the winds changed, and all of a sudden, as we all know, living around Lake Superior, how quickly that can happen. And the waves were just huge, and it capsized the boat. All 3 men went in, and of course, this is October, and back in those days, they wore wool, heavy wool, which worked against them in the water.
Like probably absorbed the water and made them heavier.
Very much so, yes. 2 of the men were swept out. My grandfather, being taller, bigger, a little bit stronger, he actually was able to make it to shore.
Wow.
And he collapsed. His wife worked on him, CPR, but for 4.5 hours. Wow. And somebody had to go to the nearest phone for help. So it involved starting a car and going down an old camp road, and I forget how many miles, like 4 miles or something, to call the Coast Guard for help. So it was a very turbulent day. It was on that day. My grandfather obviously passed away, as did the other 2 men. But on that one day, 3 women became widows. 9 children were fatherless. And it was just devastating to the community.
Oh, I cannot even fathom.
But they lived in such a time where neighbors helped neighbors. And I read in the newspaper articles how the city kind of like embraced these women
Wow.
and helped them. So this is October when it happened. They're facing winter. People pitched in and shoveled their driveways and, whatever was necessary. In fact, we honored this. We had a 90-year reunion or remembrance, we called it. And we actually went to the place where it happened. Wow. We connected and found all of the other family members. And that was a big undertaking.
I cannot believe all of the work and time that you put into this.
It was, but again, I realized I wasn't planning it. I think these three men did. Mm-hmm. And I bring it back to that moment that they were capsized. It was a swift death. They didn't get their goodbyes. They left their wives and their children in turmoil. I don't think that's the ending that they wanted. So when we got together for this remembrance, we were meeting these other family members for the first time.
Wow.
We had a meet and greet the night before. We wanted to do this on that day of drowning.
Wow.
90 years later.
Oh my goodness.
So we had a meet and greet, and one of the families shared with us that August of that year, in her bloodline, they needed a new furnace in that home. And they sold their life insurance policy to pay for the new furnace.
Just months
and that was
prior.
In August.
Wow.
They sold their life insurance policy. It was enough money to put a furnace in. They were thrilled they were going to have a warm winter. And October comes and all three of them pass away. And now there's no life insurance money. There's no money to bury them. And that's where the community pitched in. All of a sudden, it was people were borrowing them cars to get family members to the cemetery after the service. We heard stories how that Christmas, of course, the women are still grieving. They're devastated.
Oh my! You go to a camp for a celebration,
a family celebration,
and tragedy,
and you end up burying your husband. And this is, 8 weeks before Christmas. So Christmas rolls around, and those women had to have been grieving, and just their mindset had to have been elsewhere. And they said there was a newspaper article on how all of a sudden neighbors, the town, pitched in, and there were Christmas presents at their doorstep for the kids. There were turkeys, there were hams. So these women were allowed to grieve, and the community supplied for their family and helped out. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to remember. Maybe we could include that in today's life,
Absolutely. Because there was no Social Security at that time. There was no check that was going to come in from the government to provide for this family.
Correct.
Does your grandmother go to work?
My grandmother went to work. She had to have been an incredibly strong woman. She never remarried. She raised her 3 children. My dad was the only gentleman of the family, and it sounds like he was the fix-it man from a very early age. They were very fortunate and had a wonderful neighbor next door who had no children. So he and his wife kind of put their wing around my dad and my 2 aunts. That was a blessing. But my grandmother worked. She provided for the family, and it was very important to her every summer that she include some form of travel to expose her children to a form of travel. Maybe it wasn't far some years, and some years it was, but she managed to do that. That is amazing to me.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing.
Extraordinary. She could have gone into a depression.
She could have crumbled up and shut society out.
Yes.
And she put on her boots and went to work.
Wow.
Her first name was Mary.
Okay.
They met. When the 2 of them met, I was told they were just like the perfect match, and he was the love of her life.
Wow.
And when I stepped back and realized, oh, no wonder there were so little stories about my grandfather to pass down, really, they were only married 6 years.
Wow.
And in 6 years of marriage, you don't get the depth of, of somebody and of your spouse and their history.
Oh my goodness. And then 3 children in
Three
those
children.
6 years.
Mhm. Yes,
So did they meet in the United States?
they did.
Okay.
They did.
And-
In Negaunee.
In Negaunee.
Yes.
Mary came from Finland as well.
No, she was Italian, had a lot of Italian blood in her.
Okay.
And I believe it was her grandfather and her great-grandfather that came.
Okay.
So she was living in Negaunee, and oddly enough, her father had passed away in a mining accident. So she was fatherless. I believe she was like 11 when she was fatherless. And I thought, what a hard life. And then she marries, and it repeats itself.
Wow.
Only this time,
Wow.
she's the spouse. It was her spouse that
Yes.
passed away, and her children are fatherless.
Just to think about the enormity of the grief and the
Right.
trials. And yet, Mary says, well, not only am I going to raise my children, I'm going to show them the world and travel with them. Like, what a resilient, beautiful woman.
Yes.
And I think it's so amazing that Lenhart sort of like spoke to you. And I want to go back to this 90th year. Like, you definitely felt somewhere deep within you that this was unresolved.
Yes.
That it was
Very much so.
your job or calling or due to your family lineage to make, I don't want to say peace out of this, but closure. Tell me a little more. I know it was very difficult for you to put this together because trying to get a hold of all of these families, I mean,
Yes.
that was like, it's 2025 now. This was 100 years ago.
Right.
And so names have changed.
Right.
Like, I mean, well, tell me about the breadth of what you had to do to contact these other families and their children and grandchildren. And
That was the head scratcher. Where do we begin? I was doing this with 2 beautiful, sweet, wonderful cousins who are very computer savvy. So we had a meeting of the minds on how to go about finding. We thought we knew so little about our grandfather, and we knew so little about the drowning, that they had to have been in the same situation.
yeah.
So we thought, why don't we collectively walk through this together? One of the cousins was very computer savvy, and she took the lead. And lo and behold, she found the older generation whose names were the same, and we were able to go forward with that. It took a lot of research. When we decided we needed to honor them, I always felt, since I was 8, 9, 10, 11, I look back at that age and I always felt he was asking me to be his voice. I don't know if it was my listening skills. I don't know if it was just I was accepting of that, and he just knew he could reach me. So I realized I was doing this for him, that this was something he needed. And we began to research, and we thought the best place to do this, let's see if we can find the camp. We were pretty sure it was on a shot point
Okay.
on the way to Munising. We were pretty sure it was probably dismantled, and big, beautiful homes, had gone up in that area. So we were sure that that was included. So then we said, well, there's a couple of little parks that are open to the public. What if we just gathered by the beach and we had our little remembrance there? And we had to investigate, could we do this? We found out what was public area access would be whatever wet sand there was. If it's wet sand, it's public access. Because as you walk along, there were a lot of private homes there. Well, how far do they go? So we were told wet sand. Well, we had many, many visits to the library, and we were looking up the old mining journal, newspaper articles. We were getting our hands on anything that we could. And one of my cousins had the brainstorm, why don't we take the original mining journal article to the mining journal and say, this is what happened 90 years ago. And we were hoping maybe out of that we would contact somebody that we missed, or, you know, we just thought it could be another lead. So they were very excited.
Really?
And probably because we had the original newspaper, the 1927 newspaper article.
Wow.
So we went in with that, and I said, this was the writings, these are the pictures, this is all that we had from that the mining journal published. Well, they liked that. But we thought we were probably going to get a little 2x2, inch little information thing in the back. Well, lo and behold, on the Saturday's edition, we got front page coverage. And we thought, oh, surely this is going to, touch somebody that we've missed. And we'll recognize in the article, that was my ancestor.
Yes.
So I was so excited that we hit front page news. And about an hour later, I got a phone call. And it was this gentleman, and he said, well, you're describing where this drowning took place, and it's my camp.
Wow.
And I was stunned. I was speechless.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, that was my great-grandfather's.
Wow.
So his great-grandfather and my grandfather were buddies. I had never met him prior to that. He said, I have the camp.
Oh, my gosh.
And it's in 1927 condition. We've done nothing to it. And he said, I'm going to go out there. We have a log that we've kept. I wonder if there's anything in there on that drowning.
Oh, my God.
He said, but what I want you to know is on that day that you're going to have this remembrance, October 9th, he said, the camp is yours.
Oh.
I thought for the first time in my life, I thought, I guess I just won the lottery. And it's beyond $1 million. So he offered us the space, which is, was a problem for us. And that was a game changer. So then our search, we were able to search a little further out with some leads. We had family members from the country of Sweden come for this. California, Oklahoma, New York. I mean, it just went on and on and on.
It wasn't just 5 or 10 people from the UP.
No.
Wow.
It was global. And the individual that came from Sweden, it was his uncle. And he was named after his uncle.
Oh, wow.
And he came because he said, my whole life I grew up hearing about the uncle that passed away. And how, he was in America and he hadn't been here all that long. And so he said, I just felt like I needed to be here for him. So then I thought, there's these 3 men on different levels want this to become very peaceful.
Absolutely.
A peaceful event. The other family didn't have, their outcome was a little bit different. The oldest child that witnessed the drowning and was there and saw trauma, he was 10. And that trauma stayed with him.
Devastated.
And it devastated him, and it devastated generations ahead of him. And so that family really wanted to put peace to it. So I then began to realize that this was a quick, swift death, tragic event. And there's some peace that has to come out of it.
Yeah.
So when we planned it, we had the meet and greet. The next day was October 9th. We started out at the cemetery, and we went to each grave. And we placed flowers at each grave, and we said a prayer, and we thanked them for the generations that were here. Look what, you gave. You gave the earth generations that are going forward, and we're here to honor you. Then we went out to the camp where the drowning took place. They were so generous. They had the coffee pot on in true Finnish fashion, the coffee pot on. Goodies were on the table. And we went down to the beach. The drowning happened at 2.
Okay.
And we wanted to do something starting right at 2.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting. When we started out at 2, we said a prayer. The water was just softly rolling in. And by the time we were kind of into the maybe like 10 after 2, the full time frame of the drowning, the waves started to get bigger and bigger. Wow. I didn't notice it at first, but there was some pretty powerful waves coming in, and we were guided and told at the end of our little remembrance, we had bagpipes coming down, playing Going Home.
Oh, Barb.
And we had 90 fresh flowers to throw in the water for the 90 years since they had passed away. And our guidance, we were told, take off your shoes and socks, roll up your pants, become the water, go and become the water. And everybody took flowers, and there were 90 of them. We just threw out. And as that happened, the water became calm. And these were just floating. It was almost like a painted Monet, colorful and floating. And if there were waves, they just rolled in peacefully. And I thought this was the ending they wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted peace, some color. Wanted to know all of these generations that were here. They survived.
That they are okay now.
They're okay. But your gift will carry on in them.
What is the connection of being in the water? Like, I don't want to say, do you think that there was like in the water carrying negative energy or like grief or sorrow or I mean, the fact that you were in the water and doing this and putting the flowers in the water, like making peace, like here and now.
Yes.
Making peace sort of, I don't want to say energetically, but like throughout kind of time and space.
Yes.
To bring everything to like.
That was, I do think the water holds so much energy. And I realized my grandfather was just the one of many, many, many people that have passed away in that lake. So we took a moment, and it was to add peace not only to our ancestors, but to anybody else that would find themselves in, or families, not just the individuals that had passed away, but families. Maybe these flowers can indicate some inner peace for them as well.
Yeah.
And it was very peaceful. When we stepped out of the water, I had that inside me. It was this big, like, oh.
Well, how old were you when you did this 90-year remembrance? How old were you at that exact moment?
So I was, 60. That was, I got to do the math here.
Well, 60-ish.
Yes.
So
I had a lifetime of Lenhart steering me on what he wanted. First, I had to get educated. I had to accept that I was interested in him. I didn't fight that. I was fueled. I was fueled. Every little morsel of information was energizing me to find more. I could share one little event in the investigative part that made me, convinced me that this was his plan. So the two cousins and I were at the library, Negaunee Library, and we were wondering, we found something about the Swedish Mission Church. So we said, well, Lenhart must have gone to that because he was Swedish.
Yes.
And is it still standing? So on a whim, we drove a couple blocks from the library, and there it was. It was becoming a home. It was purchased and turned into a home. My cousin, who is more gutsy than I am, said, I'll just go knock on the door. She sprung out of the back seat, she went up to the door, and she's knocking on the door. And I was sitting in the car. There's a little hill, and at the top of the hill comes a mail truck.
Wow.
Now, what I thought, well, this is ironic. My grandfather was being the mailman and the first guy to go out in a truck. And why is there a truck here? Because the post office is only a block and a half over. Why would a truck come?
Yeah.
And so this truck pulls up, and the mailman looks over at me, and he smiles, and he gets out of his truck, and he goes to the mission church. He doesn't go to the house before or the house after. He just went to that mission church. And he walked up on the stairs, put something in, and walked back, got in his truck, looked at me sitting in the car, and drove away. And
Wow, I have chills.
I thought that look was unexplainable. And then I realized what was behind him was a car that pulled up, and this woman gets out of the car, and she walks to what is her home, that Swedish Mission Church, and my cousin's coming down off of the stairs, and she introduced herself, and she explained what we were doing. And she said, oh, so she said, my cousin had just said, well, we're just trying to see if this was the mission church. And she said, oh, indeed it was. Would you like to come in? She said, I'll give you a tour. Wow. And then all three of us were standing there, and she said, well, isn't this a coincidence? She said, and she looks at her watch, and she said, I'm never out of work at this time. And so she said, it was just by good fortune that I was. And then I couldn't get out of my head. That was not a coincidence. And Lenhart led her to us through the mail truck.
And you know what's interesting? Like, I think about a movie. Like, I'm imagining these visions, these pictures as you're talking, like a movie. And I can see like a smirk or a smile.
Exactly.
And I think, was that an angel?
Yes.
Was that
Yes.
Like, was that
Yes.
real?
Yes.
This mailman comes only to this one place.
One building, not to the left, nothing to the left, nothing to the right. And when the mail truck pulled up and the mailman looked at me, I had tingles. Because I thought because it was a mail truck.
Yes.
I thought, well, this is just an odd, but it was happening so fast, I didn't have time to think. But I do clearly remember going, remember this feeling. Come back to this feeling.
Okay.
And so by remaining in the car and letting a few things unfold, my brain could catch up with my emotions. And I then paid close attention to the mailman that got back into the truck. And when he looked over at me again, it kind of did a little nod of the head, and off he went. I just thought the very same thing. You're an angel. You're a messenger.
Yeah.
And to this day, I truly believe that.
I love to hear your openness and like your willingness on this journey, because so many people for decade after decade, maybe they would have given up.
Right.
Maybe they would have said, wow, I'm running into this dead end. This is so much energy. I mean, you're living your own life. You have children. I mean, I think we need to bring in the fact that what you had done for so many years and decades was take over your mother-in-law's baking business.
Yes.
I mean, we could probably talk for 2 more hours about all of this, but here you are within your busy life, navigating XYZ,
Yeah.
time, raising children, helping with grandchildren. But this was this deep, big, moving current comes to my mind, like pulling you, pushing you, bringing you to this moment to make peace.
To make peace. And I think it was just so, being prepared over many years allowed me to enter it all slowly. And so my mind began to open slowly. And I reached a point where I was convinced that I needed to be a good listener. In fact, I had a conversation with Lenhart, and I said, I am very much understanding what you're asking of me. Here's what I'm going to ask of you is please let me know how I can service this. And the two men, I want to do it the right way. But I need you to communicate with me, and I promise I will be open. Make your presence felt to me, and I will be open. And once I acknowledged that, everything just started to fall into place. The camp, the people, everything just fell into place. And I still, to this day, that was in 2019 that we had our Remembrance. And I've gone forward and I've said to him, we've completed that, but I feel like so connected to you. I want to continue to be connected to you. In fact, if I can be so bold to say, before I did this, I had a little conversation this morning with him. And I simply told him that if there's something in particular that you want me to bring out, please let me know. And I always know he's listening. I always know he's there. And it matches what I feel, matches the description that I've been told. Big personality, kind, would help anybody, And I just think that what I feel is his strong, strong personality. So,
did he tell you anything else that he wanted you to share or express or get through? Or, I mean, we know that this podcast could reach people that we've never even met or that randomly choose this episode to listen to.
yes, it's very important to be aware of our ancestors. Even though he's gone, he's letting me know there is still guidance. And his bloodline runs within me, my sister, my brother, my cousins, and we carry on through him. And the bloodline that has passed is still such a strength. We have to ask. We do have to ask. Maybe I asked in a funny way by just wanting to know how my dad felt growing up without a father. Maybe that was my opening of the door. But we do have to ask. And there's peace in knowing, regardless how our ancestors went, if it was a turbulent death or a peaceful death, there is peace within them and guidance within them.
And I think that alone can just bring so much comfort.
Absolutely.
Someone who feels like one of their loved ones passing was unexpected or tragic or too soon or horrible. I think that would probably give so many people comfort to hear all of the details of this story.
Yeah.
Which is true. I mean, not a story, but your retelling of this life experience.
And our ancestors walked the earth. They made contributions. In my case, they were both dead before I was born. So how was I to know? I think by researching our ancestry, we learn and become deeper as a person. We have more to give. We have more to offer. And I almost kind of wonder, so when it's my turn to cross over, will I be able to offer more because I've obtained more now? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I would assume yes is the answer to that. Yeah. Well, Barb, I think this is such a beautiful and perfect place to close this episode. I know we could talk about so many other things, but I think Lenhart is smiling and
I know he is. Yeah.
that his beautiful granddaughter
Yeah.
is sharing his story.
Yeah.
And that you've really, truly spent most of your life.
Connected to him.
Yeah.
Very connected to him. My sweet, adorable granddaughter lovingly says, "You're obsessed with him." And in a way I am. In a good way. But he is rich. He's enriched my life. I did not know him or meet him, I guess I should say. But the ways he's enriched my life, I can't even count. And I think that is there for everybody in your ancestral line, if you want it.
If you're open.
If you're open, if you want it.
Barb, thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you. Thank
for
you.
being on Conversations with a Chiropractor.
Yeah.
It has been such an honor. And we definitely
appreciate
need
it.
to do a part 2. There's so much more.
I'd be happy to. Thank you. It was an honor.
Thanks, Barb.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, like, or subscribe? You can find me on social media at wautierwellness.com, Dr. Stephanie Wautier on Instagram, or Wautier Wellness Chiropractic and Massage on Facebook. And I'm so curious where your next conversation will take you.